So we're like 1 week away, right, from our launch and our relaunch, and that also means we're 1 week. This is the last week you have to hear me recap the entire summer, all right. And so the reason I've been doing that is because obviously for one reason the summers are we're kind of sporadic with attendance, right? And so what I've been trying to do is we've been trying to spend a lot of time training ourselves up and also keeping everyone in the loop as we've been doing vacations and school and different things going on during the week. So we started out, right, we're kind of going on this quest, and we have this kind of internal quest that we're dealing with, but we're all going to do something. We're all called to do something, and part of that is that what we decided was this is not so much about a destination. This relaunch of Impact and our relaunch of our traditional services is not really a destination we're going to, but we're hoping to have a transformation inside, that we actually become new people, become more like Jesus, because that's really the whole goal of this thing, is that if we would each become more like Jesus, and that's what that quest is about. And so then we decided we're going to talk about love, and we talked about love a lot because that's what we're going to be about, right? And we said that our verse there from Paul was that the only thing that matters, remember? The only thing that matters is faith expressing itself through love. And so we just really pounded on that and talked about loving our enemies, our neighbors, loving ourselves, and how can we really love people if we're not aware of the value that we have as individuals. And so one of the things that we also want to do outside of this training kind of in here on Sundays, that we prepared for this, we've also been trying to get out into the community. And so one of the things we did, if you remember, so we got out and we did the snow cone thing, and then just recently we did a laundromat ministry where we just showed up and just blessed people. And it wasn't even that they, if someone came up to us and says, there's a poorer part of the neighborhood you could go to instead of coming here or whatever. I was like, well, we're really just here just to love everybody. There's not just people that are struggling financially. There's people that are just struggling emotionally. People are struggling relationally. And so it's like just to know that someone cares. And that's really all we were trying to do. And so, these things are the things that we're going to get out into our community and serve, other than just we're feeding the poor, we're feeding people that need food, we're providing different ministries, but we're also going to go out and just let the world know, let our community know that we just care and that we're here, right? And part of the issue is just letting people know that we're here. And so we started this kind of prepare to launch series that we're ending this week. And what we decided was what kind of people we're going to be, right? We wanted to decide what is it that's going to make us unique, or what are we going to be defined as a community. And we said we're going to be a people that invite people, right? I mean, this is what's going to make us, and we're going to really be able to reach people, is we're going to be a people that invite people, because we said found people find people, right? Found people find people. And so it's just the nature of us is when we find something we love, we go out and we tell other people about it. And then we said we're going to be a hospitable people, right? Hospitable people, like if you're going to invite people over, you're going to also make sure that you're ready for them, that you're prepared for them to show up. And so we just talked a lot about different ways that we as a group, and all this stuff's online, so I'm not going to preach the whole sermon over again, right? You can go back and listen to it and talk about what we're doing in-house to make sure that we're ready for people to show up, not just next week, but continually, right? And we said that we really just need ushers, right? Greeters, right? So if you haven't signed up for that yet, go ahead and do that on your Connect card. And then last week we said we're going to be remembering people. Well, what does that mean? Remembering people is basically, we said that the whole idea of our following Jesus is a remember what he did on the cross, right? We're going to make sure that this is always about him, that he's the focus, that Jesus is the center of the whole thing. He says, do this in remembrance of me when we take communion. And so we're a remembering people that always go back and always point to what Jesus did on the cross. So if you have your Bibles, we're gonna begin today in Luke chapter 15 and basically stay there. I'm going to jump to a few other passages, but most of it's just going to be in Luke chapter 15. It's a famous, kind of a famous chapter, and so we're just going to dive in and just see what happens. All right. So Luke chapter 15, verse 1. It says, now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. All right, so let's stop there. There's 30 verses in this. I'm not going to stop after each one of them, all right? At least I don't plan on it, all right? So the first thing is Jesus, they said Jesus had gathered around tax collectors and sinners. And so this is one of my favorite attributes of Jesus, right? That Jesus, people least like Jesus were most attracted to Jesus. You tracking with me? Right? Those that were farthest, that were nothing like him, the ones that a lot of the religious leaders were pushing off to the side and putting off to the margins of their lives and their culture, those folks were most attracted to Jesus. And so I look at that, and when I try to look at our church, not just our church, but the church in general, and go, okay, are we attractive to people that are not like Jesus? But you got to be careful, because I think there's a tendency to do things that aren't biblical in order to make people like Jesus more. Like, we tend to do so many things. We'll talk about, well, if you sow $10, you'll get $1 million someday, or a house will get paid off, or we won't talk about sin, or we'll do some things, and we'll kind of water down some of the Bible at times so that people feel better. So I'm not saying we should do that, but what I am saying, that if we are not attractive to those not like Jesus, are we like Jesus? Right? Because everywhere you go, everywhere you read Scripture where Jesus is, people are attracted to him. People are going after him. They want to be close to him. They want to know what's going on. What is he up to? And I think that the church should also be that way. People should wonder, what is going on in there? What are those folks up to? All right, so it says in verse 2, but the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. And so this is, so welcome sinners and eats with them is it's a further step than just like, well, we're going to invite a group of people that we don't know maybe to the church and we'll feed them, or we're going to have an event, or even like a Sunday morning, like people are going to come in and we're going to be nice and then we're going to go about our way. Like, no, Jesus was friend of sinner, right? Like friend of those not like him, was eating with folks not like him. And so it goes into kind of community, that we're called to have community. And if you have a job, right, you're probably in community with people not like Jesus. I mean, if you're around your spouse, you're probably in community with people not like Jesus, right? Is that okay to say? Am I all right with that one, babe? So, but we have people, so it's about creating this space with people. Because listen, Jesus, this is what they said about Jesus in Matthew chapter 11, verse 19. They said, you don't have this up there, I don't think. So it says, the Son of Man, Jesus talking about himself, said, the Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say he is a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. See, Jesus had spent so much time with people that he began to get associated with people. That's the church. I mean, we're supposed to be like Jesus, right? We're supposed to be associating with everybody all around us, but there's a danger, right? There's a danger in that, because what is it? I think as far as like an NA program, or like addicts, ex-addicts or addicts will take care of those coming in, right? But there's got to be a time span between you just getting clean and you going and helping someone get clean, right? So there's kind of that, so there's a tension to manage, right? Where are you ready to help those people? But we are all called into service of those around us, to have community and not set ourselves off or block ourselves out from those that are where we have been even, right? So then Jesus says this in verse 3. Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. And so this is 2 verses I stopped after this time, so we're doing okay. All right, so now we don't know exactly for you and I, we're not anybody a shepherd, just before I say none of us are shepherds. Okay, so none of us are really shepherds. And so we're not really in on the value of a sheep or what it means to be a shepherd. But David clues us in a passage we read, I think maybe a couple months ago in 1 Samuel 17. He says, but David said to Saul, he said, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. And when it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Right? So first off, that should really change your view of a shepherd. Right? Because if it's not the hook and just the pretty sandals and just sitting under a tree and petting a sheep, right? He's like killing lions, all right? So it's a little bit different. And this should also change your idea of the value of a sheep in that culture, right? That David was risking his life for one. And so this is kind of, when Jesus is talking about it, he says, suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? See, he says, this isn't even a consideration. Of course, he said, isn't that what they do? Isn't that what a shepherd does? If he loses one, he leaves the 99 and he goes after it. And the one is in more grave danger by itself than the group is. And this is a key feature of the church. This is really a huge part of what it means to be the church, that we should always be going after the one that's not here, right? That we primarily exist for those that aren't yet here. Like as a church, we exist for those that aren't here, and we should always kind of have that mindset, and that mindset is that of the 99. That we ought to be safe here. This is a safe place, and that's what we're talking about, that this ought to be a safe place for those that aren't here. And we're creating that place that someone can come with all their garbage, with all their baggage, that this is a safe place for you and for them. But I think the sheep represents a wanderer. Like a sheep, you got to think about it. I don't think the sheep intended to get lost. It just kind of put your head down and it's just kind of eating. It's just doing its thing. One munch after one munch, just chewing, and off they go, and they look up at one point and they go, where am I? And I think there's a lot of folks like in our community that maybe didn't intend to be in the situation that they're in. But one day they kind of looked up, and maybe they looked at a spouse and said, I don't even know who you are anymore, right? And what happens is we go to work, have kids, right? And it becomes about the babies, and we're not getting sleep, and then work's going through the roof, and it's just awesome. Or maybe you're just barely making it, doing that 9 to 5. You're working maybe the nights. You're barely hanging on, not getting enough sleep, but you're just chugging away. And it's like 5-7 years later, it's like, man, I don't even know how I got here. And it wasn't a choice. Like, you didn't wake up not wanting, or you didn't make a choice one day to be where you're at, maybe. But you realize that now that's where you are. And it's like sometimes you need a safe place to come. And this is that our church is going to be a safe place for those that are wandering, that those just looked up one day and go, I don't know how I got here, but I don't like it. I need a place. I need some people in my life. So he goes on in verse 5. He says, and when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. And then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep. I tell you that in the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. Or suppose a woman, right, verse 8, or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Does she light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully for it? So the coin is a little bit different than the sheep, right? Because the sheep can kind of wander off on its own, but a coin is really completely under the control of the one that it's been given to. And so what I believe that there's folks in our community that have been mishandled, that are in a bad place in their life, not because of something they've done, but because of the way they've been treated by somebody else. Somebody that was supposed to care for them, someone that was supposed to love them, someone that was supposed to promised to be there for them. Like, there's a lot of those folks that maybe they've been abused and mistreated. Right? Our community is full of folks that have been abused and mistreated, and they're in a spot that you would be in that same spot if you experienced the same things that they experienced. Right? And so the church needs to be a safe place for people to come to go, and maybe they're likely upset at the church at times. I went up to a guy, I've done this laundry thing that we did Thursday. I've done it in the past, and I'd gone up to a guy one time and I said, hey, we're just here to, we're just paying for your laundry today. And he kind of looked at me like, kind of irritated, Well, what's the occasion? Well, I'm just blessing people, just passing a blessing on. We're blessed, we're just giving away a blessing. Because I kind of got this like anti-church vibe, right? So I was like, I didn't even say we're from a church. I was like, we're just being a blessing. And he goes, well, if you say so. Okay. I don't know how to respond to that. So I just swiped my card, and I turned to walk away. And he had this stunned kind of look on his face. Because I think what he was thinking was I was going to ask him for something, right? That I was going to request something for him, or I was going to try to pray over him, or I was going to try to talk him into Jesus, in that moment. And really all we were doing was just blessing him. And he looked stunned. And he said, well, thanks. And that was it. But there's folks out here that you're not just gonna help somebody on that first day. They're not gonna have that come to Jesus moment and all of a sudden, right? But we're planting seeds in our community, and that's why we always have to be ready for people to show up here, because as we plant these seeds throughout this community, people are going to trickle in to find out what on earth is going on in there. What are those people up to? And so in verse 9, we'll keep going. Says, and when she finds it, right, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, rejoice with me, I've found my lost coin. In the same way, I tell you, there's rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Jesus continued, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. So he divided his property between them. And so this was actually a pretty offensive thing to say. The younger son, I think he would probably get about 1/3 of the inheritance. And basically goes to his dad and says, Dad, essentially, I wish you were dead. That's what this kind of culminates as. To ask for your inheritance, to say, I wish you were dead, and I went out. So he goes to his father and asks for inheritance. And it says, not long after that, the younger son got together all he had. And he set off for a distant country, and he there squandered his wealth in wild living. And after he spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. And so he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his field to feed the pigs. And so the pigs, I don't know if you know this, in the Jewish culture, that's like you don't touch pigs. Like you don't go near pigs. Like pork, you don't have anything to do with pigs in that culture. And so here he finds himself. The only thing he can do to survive is to work with the lowest of what he considers animals, and maybe the filthiest thing in the world to him. And so it says in verse 16, it says, he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. And when he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am, starving to death? You ever have a come to Jesus moment? When he says you come to your senses? I remember the moment for me was, I was probably 2 years into the trades, and I was an apprentice, and I had gone from working as a pastor in my house with my children, 40 to 60 hours a week, to 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, night shift, 2 hours away from my house. So that's 12 hours at work, 4 hours driving, 16-hour days, leaving the house, getting back to the house. And I found myself, they had told me I had to go sweep this area, clean up an area where other people would work, because I didn't know anything about construction. You just need to clean up after people that do, all right? And so I was like, okay, so I go up here, and I was tired. I'd been working my butt off, and I was sweeping up, and I'm picking up water bottles that are full but not of water, you know what I mean? And having to throw those out, and there's chew all over the ground. I'm just cleaning up chew, and I'm just, listen, I get to tell people to do that now, okay? But at the same time, it was awful, right? But it needed done, but I just kind of go, I really screwed this thing up. And I look back. Listen, I was just talking to Ashley the other day. I said, I look back at that guy, and man, I hate him. I just was not a fan of that guy, and where he was, and I don't ever want to be that guy again. I get a stomachache thinking about that job, that specific job that I had to go to every day. Like it turns my stomach over. But there's the moment that we get so low when we realize where we're at that we have to go, well, what am I going to do now? Where do I go? What do I turn to? And so the son, he does this in verse 18. He says, I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. And so he got up and went to his father. And so have you ever had to work on your speech? We had a 40-minute bus ride from our school to the house, which meant the principal was definitely calling my house before I got home, right? I wasn't beating that phone call, right? And so I knew when I got in trouble that I had about a 40-minute span. I had to get my story straight, right? It was this, if this guy wouldn't have done, you're trying to get your story. And so he's kind of getting his story together. And it says, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. And he ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. What that means is the father had been looking for him, right? And I imagine not just that day, right? I mean, if you have kids, like you imagine just one of them being gone and not knowing where they're at. I mean, I imagine any time a shadow would have crossed, and in the distance he would have looked up and got excited, or an animal ran across and got his attention. Oh, is my son home all the time, right? And then one day he finally sees him, and he's just like, he just loses it. Because listen, in that day, for an elderly man to run was disgraceful. Like you didn't run, like you didn't, because he had to hike up his garment, and he had to show his legs, and they didn't do that. They didn't show their legs. They didn't run. Like there was this whole thing. And so, but the father runs to him because he says, he has compassion for his son. And I think he wants to get there before anybody else does. Because listen, this happens not just there, but it also happens in the church, because I guarantee the servants had probably been talking about the son. Can you believe what he did? Can you believe he just took all that and just left and just didn't care about any of us, didn't care about his dad? And then they would see him. Would they mock him? Would they spit on him as they were coming back? Would they treat him poorly? And so the father wants to get to the son before anybody else can. And that's a way that the church ought to be as well. That when someone's hurting, when someone's broken, that we have to be the one to get there before anybody else can do any more damage. That we need to be the ones that are on the lookout. We need to be the ones that will run to those that are in need. That's what the father does. He runs. And so it says, the son said to him, Father, I've sinned, right? He gets into he's going to tell he's got his story ready, right? Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. And so he's right into this speech. Listen, Pops, I know what I did, and I'm sorry. I just wanted, and it's like the father just says to his servants, quick, he just ignores them. He doesn't even want to hear his story. He doesn't care about his story. He doesn't care about his excuses. He just says, hey, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And so they began to celebrate. See, this is what it means to be the church. And if you go back to verse 17, it says, when he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? People need to know that at any moment, in their darkest place, in their worst moment, and when maybe even their friends have abandoned them, that they can come to the Father's house. That they have a safe place to go, where they will be loved on and cared for and prayed up, and this is that place. Like we need to be that place, because there's a lot of churches that aren't there. They want you to clean it up first. They want you to get everything straight first, and then come in here clean. And listen, we're going to have folks that come in here that are not clean, not physically clean, not emotionally clean, like going through some dirt, and we need to be the ones to just go, what do you need? As soon as they walk in, if you see that they're in need, it's like, wow, how can I help you? What do you need? But there's one other group that we need to be a safe place for. In verse 25, I'll finish the story here. It says, Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. And when he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. And so he called one of the servants, said to him, and asked him what was going on. He said, "Your brother has come," he replied, "and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he has him back safe and sound." And the older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property and prostitutes has come home, you kill the fattened calf for him." "My son," the father said, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." You see, it says that the father went out to him. And when you go back and the other son is on his way, it says the father ran to him. And so, and when you go to the story of the coin or the sheep, right? Is they go looking for the sheep, and when it's the coin, they go looking for the coin. And so the story is not about a prodigal son. It's not about a son. It's not about a coin. It's not about a sheep. But it's about a father. It's about someone who's lost something, someone that wants to find something so desperately that he goes to any lengths, even lengths to a cross. And that's the people we're going to be. We're going to be a safe place for people to run to. We're going to be people that seek out those who are hurt and alone. God bless.